Hey there, history buffs. Today, we're diving into the entire history of the United States, a country that has seen its fair share of ups and downs. The United States was founded in 1776, after the American Revolution, when the 13 colonies declared independence from the British Empire. Since then, it has grown into a global superpower, facing challenges and triumphs along the way. From the early days of the nation, to the Civil War, to the rise of industrialization, to the modern era, the United States has a rich and complex history. It's a story of immigration, innovation, and resilience, and it's one that we're proud to share with you. Every great nation has a story, and the story of the United States begins long before the ink dried on the Declaration of Independence. It's a tale of ambition, resilience, and revolution, a journey that transformed a collection of distant colonies into one of the most powerful nations in the world. But how did it all begin? To understand the United States, we must rewind the clock to the age of exploration and colonization. The dawn of exploration. In the late 15th century, the New World was discovered, or rather, stumbled upon by European explorers like Christopher Columbus. But long before Europeans arrived, this land was home to thriving indigenous civilizations such as the Iroquois Confederacy, the Mississippians, and the Pueblo peoples. Their stories are the roots of America's history, though too often overshadowed. When European powers like Spain, France, and England began colonizing the Americas, they brought not just settlers, but also profound changes, some for better, many for worse. For the indigenous peoples, this was a time of displacement, conflict, and disease. For the colonizers, it was an age of opportunity and expansion. Fast forward to the early 17th century, England established its first permanent colony in Jamestown, Virginia, in 1607. It was a precarious start, marked by hunger, disease, and conflict. But against all odds, the colony survived and paved the way for others. Soon, 13 British colonies stretched along the Atlantic coast, each with its own culture and economy. In the north, colonies like Massachusetts became havens for religious dissenters. In the south, agriculture reigned supreme, fueled by the labor of enslaved Africans, a dark legacy that would shape America's future. Meanwhile, cities like Philadelphia and Boston became centers of commerce and innovation, setting the stage for what was to come. For decades, the colonies operated with relative independence, but the winds of change began to blow in the mid-18th century. Britain, burdened by debt from the 7 Years' War, turned to its colonies for revenue. The result, a series of taxes and laws that infuriated the colonists. The Stamp Act, the Tea Act, and the infamous taxation without representation became rallying cries for resistance. Colonists didn't just grumble, they organized. The Sons of Liberty, Committees of Correspondence, and eventually the Continental Congress were born, uniting disparate colonies under a common cause: freedom. The Revolutionary War. By 1775, the tension boiled over into armed conflict. The battles of Lexington and Concord marked the start of the American Revolutionary War, a war that would last 8 grueling years. Leading the charge was General George Washington, a determined but often underestimated leader. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the war, and the United States of America was born. But the story doesn't end here, it was only the beginning. From these humble, tumultuous beginnings, a new nation emerged, ready to face the challenges and opportunities of independence. Join us next time as we explore how this fledgling republic navigated its early years and built the foundation for the modern United States. This is Unfolded Timelines, bringing history to life, forging a nation. The early years of the United States. The year was 1783. The Revolutionary War was over, and the United States had won its independence. But as the euphoria of victory faded, a sobering reality set in. The war had been hard, but building a nation would be even harder. With no precedent to guide them, the leaders of this young republic faced a monumental challenge: how to unite 13 distinct states into one cohesive nation. At first, the new nation was governed by the Articles of Confederation, a system designed to prevent tyranny by keeping power in the hands of the states. But this loose framework was fraught with problems. Congress had no power to tax, regulate trade, or enforce laws. The result, a government on the brink of collapse. The Constitutional Convention. In 1787, 55 delegates gathered in Philadelphia to fix the Articles of Confederation. What they created instead was nothing short of revolutionary: the United States Constitution. Led by figures like George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, the delegates debated fiercely, balancing state and federal power, big states and small, and the role of slavery in this new framework. The result was a masterpiece of compromise, a system of checks and balances, 3 branches of government, and a promise to add a Bill of Rights to protect individual freedoms. But not everyone was satisfied. Ratifying the Constitution sparked fierce debates between Federalists, who supported a strong central government, and Anti-Federalists, who feared it would trample on states' rights. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States, a testament to the trust the nation placed in his leadership. But Washington faced an uphill battle. The country was deeply in debt, divided politically, and still finding its footing on the world stage. To tackle these challenges, Washington turned to a trusted team, including Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. Hamilton's financial policies, such as establishing a national bank, helped stabilize the economy, but also sparked fierce opposition, laying the groundwork for America's first political parties. After 2 terms, Washington set a precedent by stepping down, warning the nation against the dangers of political factions and foreign entanglements. His leadership set the tone for what a president could and should be. Growing pains of a new nation, political rivalries, and the election of 1800. Meanwhile, political divisions deepened. The Federalists, led by figures like John Adams, advocated for a strong central government, while the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, championed states' rights and agrarian values. These rivalries culminated in the election of 1800, a bitter contest that would forever change American politics. Jefferson's victory marked the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties, a milestone that demonstrated the resilience of the young republic's democratic principles. As Jefferson took office, the United States stood at the dawn of a new era, ready to embrace expansion and innovation, but still grappling with its identity, reflection, and transition. The early years of the United States were marked by trials and triumphs, an experiment in democracy that many doubted would survive. But survive it did, thanks to visionary leaders, the will of the people, and a constitution that provided both structure and flexibility. Yet, the challenges were far from over. In our next episode, we'll explore how the Louisiana Purchase, westward expansion, and the War of 1812 shaped the young nation's destiny. This is Unfolded Timelines, bringing history to life, expanding horizons. The Louisiana Purchase and the War of 1812. By the dawn of the 19th century, the United States was no longer a fragile collection of colonies, but it was still a young nation, eager to grow and make its mark on the world. With dreams of expansion and independence in their hearts, Americans looked westward to the vast, untamed lands that stretched beyond the Mississippi River. It was a time of opportunity and conflict. The Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson made a deal that would change the course of American history forever. France, under Napoleon Bonaparte, offered to sell the massive Louisiana Territory, an area that stretched from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. For just $15 million, the United States doubled its size overnight. But this monumental purchase was more than just a real estate deal. It raised critical questions. How would this new land be governed? What about the Native American tribes who already called it home? Jefferson dispatched Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to chart the land, meet its inhabitants, and discover a water route to the Pacific. Their journey, guided in part by the Shoshone woman Sacagawea, revealed the vast potential and challenges of the American frontier. The road to war. While Americans celebrated the Louisiana Purchase, trouble was brewing overseas. Britain and France were locked in a bitter war, and both nations sought to limit American trade with their rival. British ships began seizing American vessels and impressing sailors into their navy, a direct affront to U.S. sovereignty. President James Madison faced mounting pressure to respond. At the same time, tensions with Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory escalated, fueled by British support for tribal resistance against American settlers. By 1812, the nation's patience had worn thin. The United States declared war on Britain, a bold move for a young country still finding its strength. The War of 1812. The War of 1812 was a test of the nation's resilience. On land and sea, American forces faced a formidable British military. Early battles, like the burning of Washington, D.C. in 1814, were devastating blows. The British even set fire to the White House, forcing President Madison and his wife, Dolly, to flee. But amidst these dark moments, there were shining victories. In Baltimore, the defense of Fort McHenry inspired Francis Scott Key to write the poem that would become the Star-Spangled Banner. And in New Orleans, General Andrew Jackson's decisive victory fought after the war officially ended due to slow communication boosted American morale and national pride. Aftermath and legacy. The Treaty of Ghent, signed in December 1814, ended the war with no territorial gains for either side. But for the United States, the War of 1812 was a defining moment. It proved that the young nation could stand its ground against a global superpower. It also fostered a sense of unity and national identity, setting the stage for an era of growth and optimism known as the Era of Good Feelings. With Britain no longer a looming threat, America turned its gaze inward and westward. The Louisiana Purchase had unlocked a vast expanse of land, and the war had solidified the country's resolve. But expansion came at a cost, particularly for Native American tribes, whose lands and cultures faced increasing encroachment, a nation ready to grow. The War of 1812 marked the end of America's infancy and the beginning of its adolescence. The nation was growing not just in size, but in ambition and self-confidence. As settlers pushed westward and new states joined the Union, the United States began to realize its manifest destiny, though not without struggle and sacrifice. The Age of Jackson and westward expansion. In 1828, a political revolution swept through the United States. Andrew Jackson, a man born into poverty on the frontier, became the nation's 7th president. He called himself the People's President, a champion of the common man. But his presidency would prove as controversial as it was transformative. Jackson's rise marked a shift in American politics. For the first time, power seemed to rest not with the elite, but with ordinary citizens. Yet Jackson's brand of democracy came with contradictions celebrated by many, feared by others, and deeply flawed in its treatment of marginalized groups. Jacksonian democracy. Under Jackson, democracy expanded at least for white men. Property requirements for voting were eliminated in many states, giving more Americans a voice in government. But Jackson's policies also widened existing divides, especially when it came to issues like tariffs and states' rights. The nullification crisis of 1830 tested Jackson's resolve. When South Carolina threatened to secede over a federal tariff, Jackson responded with forceful determination, asserting the supremacy of the federal government. This standoff highlighted growing tensions between North and South, a fault line that would only deepen in the decades to come. One of the darkest chapters of Jackson's presidency was the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Determined to open lands in the Southeast for white settlement, Jackson authorized the forced relocation of Native American tribes, including the Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole. Despite resistance from tribes and even a Supreme Court ruling in their favor, thousands of Native Americans were uprooted from their ancestral lands to journey to the designated Indian Territory, known as the Trail of Tears, claimed the lives of thousands and left a legacy of pain and injustice. Westward expansion and manifest destiny. While Jackson reshaped the East, the West beckoned. The idea of manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent, took hold of the national imagination. From the Texas Revolution to the annexation of new territories, westward expansion was seen as both a right and a duty. But expansion wasn't peaceful. It brought conflict not only with the indigenous peoples of the plains, but also with Mexico. The annexation of Texas in 1845 sparked the Mexican-American War, which resulted in the U.S. gaining vast new territories, including California, Arizona, and New Mexico. The spoils of war fulfilled America's territorial ambitions, but also reignited debates over slavery. Would these new lands permit slavery, or would they be free? The answers to these questions would pit North against South in an increasingly volatile showdown. The Industrial Revolution and rising tensions. As the United States expanded westward, it also underwent an economic transformation. The Industrial Revolution brought factories, railroads, and new technology to the North, while the South's economy remained rooted in agriculture, especially cotton, which relied heavily on enslaved labor. The economic divide between North and South grew sharper, mirrored by moral and political debates over slavery. Abolitionist movements gained momentum in the North, while the South doubled down on its peculiar institution, defending it as essential to their way of life. Activists like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman exposed the brutal realities of slavery, inspiring both outrage and action. But for every step forward, resistance followed. The nation was hurtling toward a breaking point. A war of ideals and survival, the Civil War in depth. The American Civil War 1861 to 1865 was far more than a mere conflict over territory or governance. It was a battle for the soul and future of the United States, defined by its stark ideological divides and its profound human cost. The war pitted the Union, the northern states, against the Confederacy, which comprised the seceding southern states. At its core, the conflict was deeply tied to the institution of slavery, a practice that undergirded the Southern economy and shaped its social fabric. The war's repercussions, both immediate and long-term, would profoundly alter the nation's trajectory. The roots of the conflict, the seeds of the Civil War, were sown in the country's founding. The United States was conceived as a nation committed to liberty, yet it tolerated and institutionalized slavery. Over the decades, the debate over slavery became increasingly divisive. The economic systems of the North and South diverged significantly, with the North embracing industrialization and the South remaining reliant on agriculture and enslaved labor. Efforts at compromise such as the Missouri Compromise 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 only delayed the inevitable reckoning. By the mid-19th century, abolitionist sentiment in the North had gained traction, while the South's commitment to preserving slavery deepened. Events such as the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin 1852 and the Dred Scott Decision 1857 intensified tensions. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, a president opposed to the expansion of slavery, was the final straw for Southern leaders, who saw his presidency as an existential threat. In response, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The early war, strategies and challenges. The Civil War began in April 1861 with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Initially, both sides believed the conflict would be short-lived. However, the war scope quickly expanded. The Union's primary goal was to preserve the nation, while the Confederacy fought for independence and the right to maintain its way of life, including slavery. The Union possessed significant advantages, including a larger population, greater industrial capacity, and more extensive railroad networks. However, the Confederacy had experienced military leaders, such as Robert E. Lee, and a strong motivation to defend their homeland. Early battles, including Bull Run 1861 and Shiloh 1862, revealed the war's brutality and hinted at the long and grueling struggle ahead, slavery and the war's moral imperative. While the Union's initial focus was on reunification, the question of slavery became central as the war progressed. For enslaved people, the conflict was deeply personal. Many sought freedom by escaping to Union lines, while others resisted through subtle acts of defiance. African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved, played critical roles, with approximately 180,000 joining the Union Army and Navy. The turning point came with President Lincoln's issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863. This executive order declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were free. Though it did not immediately end slavery, it fundamentally reframed the war as a fight against slavery and bolstered support for the Union both domestically and abroad. The war's turning points. The year 1863 marked key turning points in the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg, July 1 to 3, was a decisive Union victory and a catastrophic loss for the Confederacy. Often considered the war's turning point, Gettysburg ended Lee's invasion of the North and inflicted heavy casualties on his forces. Simultaneously, the Union's victory, Vicksburg, July 4, gave it control of the Mississippi River, effectively splitting the Confederacy in two. These victories shifted momentum in favor of the Union. However, the war continued to exact a staggering toll. Battles such as Chickamauga 1863 and Spotsylvania 1864 demonstrated the relentless nature of the conflict. Advances in weaponry, including rifled muskets and artillery, made the war extraordinarily deadly. Meanwhile, new technologies at the telegraph improved communication, and ironclad ships revolutionized naval warfare. The total war strategy by 1864 the Union's strategy shifted toward total war, a doctrine that targeted not just Confederate armies, but also the resources supporting them. General William Tecumseh Sherman's March to the Sea epitomized this approach. From November to December 1864, Sherman's forces marched from Atlanta to Savannah, destroying infrastructure, seizing supplies, and demoralizing the Southern population. Cities, railroads, and farms were devastated, leaving the Confederacy struggling to sustain its war effort. Meanwhile, Ulysses S. Grant, now commanding all Union forces, launched a relentless campaign against Lee's army in Virginia, known as the Overland Campaign. These battles, including the Wilderness and Cold Harbor, were characterized by heavy losses, but achieved the Union's objective of wearing down Confederate forces. The fall of the Confederacy. By early 1865, the Confederacy was on the brink of collapse. Union forces captured key Southern cities, including Richmond, the Confederate capital. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the war. In the weeks that followed, other Confederate armies also surrendered. The war's cost was staggering. Over 600,000 soldiers died, making it the deadliest conflict in American history. Countless others were wounded or displaced, and the South lay in ruins. The war's legacy, the abolition of slavery and the preservation of the Union, came at an immense human and material cost. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Just days after Lee's surrender, the nation was rocked by tragedy. On April 14, 1865, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln's death plunged the nation into mourning and cast a shadow over the immense achievements of his presidency. His vision for a reconciled and united nation would face significant challenges in the years to come. The enduring legacy of the Civil War. The Civil War's impact on the United States was profound and lasting. It preserved the Union and ended the institution of slavery, yet it left deep scars. The war's death toll, economic devastation, and lingering social divisions shaped a nation's development for decades. The unresolved questions of racial equality and civil rights would continue to challenge the United States well into the 20th and 21st centuries. The Civil War remains a defining chapter in American history. Its lessons about the cost of division, the struggle for justice, and the resilience of a nation continue to resonate, reminding us of the complexities and contradictions inherent in the American experiment. The end of Reconstruction and a divided legacy. The Civil War and Reconstruction were pivotal moments in American history, times of immense struggle, sacrifice, and change. They marked the end of slavery and the preservation of the Union, but they also left a legacy of unresolved issues. The fight for civil rights and equality would continue into the next century. The Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. Innovation and reform. After the Civil War and Reconstruction, the United States entered a period of explosive growth and transformation. The late 19th century, known as the Gilded Age, was a time of immense wealth and technological innovation, but also stark inequality and social unrest. From the glittering wealth of industrial magnates to the struggles of the working class, the Gilded Age revealed both the promise and the perils of an expanding nation. The rise of industry and big business. The Gilded Age was defined by industrial titans like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan. Carnegie revolutionized the steel industry, Rockefeller dominated oil, and Morgan controlled finance. These captains of industry, or robber barons, depending on your perspective, amassed fortunes that were almost unimaginable. Amidst the rise of industry came an age of invention that changed daily life forever. Thomas Edison lit up the world with the electric light bulb. Alexander Graham Bell connected people with the telephone, and Henry Ford's assembly line made cars affordable for the masses. These innovations fueled urbanization, as people flocked to cities for work and opportunity. By 1900, America's cities were booming, but they were also overcrowded, unsanitary, and plagued by poverty, immigration, and urbanization. During the Gilded Age, millions of immigrants arrived in the United States, seeking a better life. Many came from Europe, but others arrived from Asia, bringing their cultures, dreams, and labor to build the railroads, factories, and farms of a growing nation. Yet, these new arrivals faced discrimination and hostility. Laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1880 restricted immigration, reflecting a growing nativist sentiment. Despite these challenges, Immigrant communities thrived, contributing to America's rich cultural tapestry. Strikes often turned violent, as seen in the Haymarket Riot of 1886 and the Pullman Strike of 1894. Despite setbacks, these efforts laid the groundwork for the labor reforms of the 20th century, the Progressive Era and Reform. By the early 20th century, a new movement emerged to address the excesses of the Gilded Age. The Progressive Era was a time of reform, led by activists, journalists, and politicians who sought to make America fairer and more just. Journalists like Upton Sinclair exposed the horrors of the meatpacking industry in the jungle, while Ida Tarbell took on Standard Oil's monopoly. Their work inspired new laws to protect consumers and break up corporate trusts. President Theodore Roosevelt championed the progressive movement with his Square Deal, targeting corrupt corporations, conserving natural resources, and protecting workers' rights. Meanwhile, the fight for women's suffrage gained momentum, culminating in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, a changing society. While progressives fought for economic and social reforms, African Americans faced the harsh realities of Jim Crow segregation. Leaders like Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois proposed different paths forward. Washington emphasized education and self-reliance, while Du Bois advocated for immediate civil rights and political action. Despite systemic racism, African American communities thrived, contributing to America's cultural and intellectual life, setting the stage for future civil rights movements. The Gilded Age and Progressive Era marked a turning point for the United States. It was a time of growth and change, of incredible innovation and deep inequality. As the nation entered the 20th century, it was poised to take its place on the world stage, yet still grappling with the challenges of justice and equality. The 20th century, wars, prosperity, and resilience. As the 20th century dawned, the United States stood on the brink of a new era. The nation had grown into an industrial powerhouse, its cities thriving, its people optimistic. But with great power came great responsibility and challenges that would shape the century ahead. The first of those challenges came in 1914, with the outbreak of World War I. Though it began far from America's shores, the conflict would soon draw the nation into its vortex, testing its ideals and its resolve. World War I and America's entry. World War I was a war unlike any other, marked by trench warfare, machine guns, and chemical weapons. For 3 years, the United States remained neutral, reluctant to involve itself in a European conflict. But German attacks on American ships and the infamous Zimmermann telegram changed everything. In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson declared war on Germany, framing it as a fight for democracy. American soldiers, known as doughboys, joined the Allies on the Western Front, helping to turn the tide of the war. By 1918, the war was over, but its consequences were just beginning. The Treaty of Versailles officially ended the conflict, but its harsh terms sowed the seeds for future turmoil. At home, America faced a new challenge, transitioning from war to peace in a rapidly changing world. The Roaring Twenties, the 1920s, roared with energy and innovation. It was a decade of economic boom, cultural change, and newfound freedoms. Jazz music filled the air, women won the right to vote, and Henry Ford's assembly line put cars in the hands of ordinary Americans. But the era wasn't without its contradictions. Prohibition banned alcohol, fueling a rise in organized crime. And beneath the glitz and glamour, a volatile stock market was setting the stage for disaster. In October 1929, the stock market crashed, marking the end of the Roaring Twenties and plunging the nation into its darkest economic hole, the Great Depression. The Great Depression of the 1930s was a time of unprecedented hardship. Unemployment soared, banks failed, and millions lost everything. Across the country, families stood in breadlines, while the Dust Bowl turned fertile farmland into barren wastelands. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt became president, promising a new deal for the American people. Through programs like Social Security and public works projects, Roosevelt sought to rebuild the economy and restore hope. While not all of his policies succeeded, they redefined the role of government in American life. World War II. America as a global power. The Cold War and civil rights, a nation in transformation. In the wake of World War II, the United States stood as a global superpower, but it was not alone. The Soviet Union, America's wartime ally, had become its greatest rival. The Cold War, a decades-long struggle for ideological and geopolitical dominance, had begun. At the heart of this conflict was a clash of ideologies: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus authoritarianism. The stakes: nothing less than the future of the world. The Cold War heated up almost immediately. In 1948, the Soviet Union blockaded Berlin, cutting off supplies to the Western-controlled sectors of the city. The United States responded with the Berlin airlift, delivering food and supplies by air, a clear demonstration of resolve. Both sides raced to build nuclear arsenals, leading to an era of constant tension. The US adopted a policy of containment, aiming to prevent the spread of communism. This strategy led America into conflicts around the globe, including Korea and Vietnam, the space race and technological marvels. The Cold War wasn't just fought with weapons, it also played out in space. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the world's first satellite, shocking the world and igniting the space race. The United States responded with the Apollo program, culminating in Neil Armstrong's historic moon landing in 1969. This rivalry spurred technological innovation, giving rise to advancements in computing, telecommunications, and medicine technologies that would shape the modern world. The Civil Rights Movement. While America focused on the global stage, a revolution was brewing at home. The Civil Rights Movement of the 1950s and 1960s challenged centuries of racial injustice and segregation, demanding equality for African Americans. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and Rosa Parks galvanized a movement that sought change through nonviolent protest, legal challenges, and grassroots organizing. Landmark victories, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, transformed the nation, but the struggle for true equality was far from over. These victories came at great cost, as the movement faced violent opposition and the tragic assassinations of its leaders. Yet their legacy continues to inspire movements for justice and equality around the world. The Vietnam War and social unrest. Meanwhile, the Cold War's ideological battles dragged America into the quagmire of Vietnam. What began as an effort to stop communism in Southeast Asia became a deeply divisive conflict, sparking protests at home and abroad. The Cold War's final chapters. By the 1980s, the Cold War began to thaw. President Ronald Reagan ramped up military spending but also worked with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to reduce nuclear arms. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of Soviet dominance in Eastern Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed, marking the official end of the Cold War. America emerged as the world's sole superpower, but new challenges awaited in the post-Cold War world. A new millennium, a new era. As the world entered the 21st century, the United States stood at the crossroads of a new global order. The tech revolution was transforming daily life, and the internet was becoming a central part of communication and commerce. But no one could have predicted how quickly the landscape would change and how the events of September 11, 2001, would alter America's place in the world forever. On the morning of September 11, 2001, terrorist group Al-Qaeda carried out a series of coordinated attacks on the United States. Two planes flew into the Twin Towers in New York City. A third struck the Pentagon, and a fourth, United Airlines Flight 93, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. America's war on terror didn't stop in Afghanistan. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq, claiming Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. The conflict in Iraq, coupled with Afghanistan, would define much of the first decade of the 21st century. While the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were portrayed as necessary to ensure national security, they sparked debate over American foreign policy, with questions about the justification for war, the handling of prisoners, and the toll on soldiers and civilians alike. The Obama presidency, a new era of change. 2008 marked a turning point in Barack Obama, a junior senator from Illinois, captured the hearts of millions and became the first African-American president of the United States. His election wasn't just a victory, it was a powerful symbol of progress and a step toward healing a nation still grappling with its history. Once in office, President Obama set out to reshape the nation. One of his most transformative achievements was the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, which brought health insurance to millions of Americans who previously lacked coverage. But that wasn't all his presidency tackled: the defining issues of our time: climate change, immigration reform, and the fight for LGBT rights, technology and innovation in the U.S. a deep dive into the past, present, and future. 1. Introduction to the role of technology in the U.S. The United States has been a global leader in technological development for over a century. From its early industrialization to the rise of the digital age and now, into the era of artificial intelligence (AI) and biotechnology, American innovation has driven much of the world's progress, particularly in areas such as computer science, the internet, aerospace, and health technology. This chapter will take an in-depth look at how technology has shaped the U.S. both economically and socially, tracing its development from the earliest inventions to today's groundbreaking technologies, and projecting the possibilities for the future. In the context of the U.S., technology is not just a tool for convenience, but a major economic driver. It plays a crucial role in reshaping industries, creating jobs, and altering daily life in profound ways. American companies have been pioneers in almost every technological field, from the birth of the computer to the current revolution in AI and the exploration of space. With such a rich history of technological advancement, it is essential to understand how these innovations have influenced and continue to influence not just the U.S., but the world. 2. Historical technological advancements and their impact. Early innovations. The Industrial Revolution. The story of U.S. technological advancement begins in earnest with the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. The United States, a relatively new country at the time, became a global leader in industry by developing technologies that dramatically changed manufacturing, transportation, and communication. One of the first major innovations was the steam engine, which powered factories and later trains and boats, leading to the expansion of the American economy and the development of infrastructure like railroads. In the late 19th century, U.S. inventors such as Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell helped usher in an era of electric power and telecommunications. Edison's development of the practical electric light bulb and Bell's invention of the telephone were transformative moments in history, reshaping the American way of life and connecting individuals in ways never before possible. The rise of computing and information technology. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and another wave of technological breakthroughs radically changed American society. The computer revolution. Early computers, such as the ENIAC electronic numerical integrator and computer, were massive, room-sized machines. Over time, however, these machines shrank, becoming more affordable and accessible, thanks to developments in microelectronics. In the 1970s and 1980s, American companies like IBM, Apple, and Microsoft began to revolutionize personal computing. The development of the personal computer PC, the rise of the Internet, and the introduction of user-friendly graphical user interfaces (GUIs) made technology more accessible to the masses. As computers became an integral part of everyday life, they paved the way for the digital economy and the emergence of Silicon Valley as a global tech hub. The Internet, a new frontier. The Internet, a product of government-funded research in the 1960s, reached the mainstream in the 1990s and began to radically change American society. The creation of the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee, combined with advances in browser technology, Netscape, allowed businesses and individuals to connect in unprecedented ways. Companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, and later, Apple, redefined communication, commerce, and entertainment, and the digital economy was born. The Internet, a new frontier. The Internet, a product of government-funded research in the 1960s, reached the mainstream in the 1990s and began to radically change American society. The creation of the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee, combined with advances in browser technology, Netscape, allowed businesses and individuals to connect in unprecedented ways. Companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, and later, Apple, redefined communication, commerce, and entertainment, and the digital economy was born. As the Internet grew, so did its influence on American society. It revolutionized industries such as retail, media, education, and finance, creating new business models and transforming traditional ones. E-commerce platforms changed the way people shop, and social media platforms altered how people communicate and form relationships. The Internet allowed for a democratization of information, enabling the spread of ideas and creating a new global village. The Internet, a new frontier. The Internet, a product of government-funded research in the 1960s, reached the mainstream in the 1990s and began to radically change American society. The creation of the World Wide Web by Tim Berners-Lee, combined with advances in browser technology, Netscape, allowed businesses and individuals to connect in unprecedented ways. Companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook, and later, Apple, redefined communication, commerce, and entertainment, and the digital economy was born. As the internet grew, so did its influence on American society. It revolutionized industries such as retail, media, education, and finance, creating new business models and transforming traditional ones. E-commerce platforms changed the way people shop, and social media platforms altered how people communicate and form relationships. The internet allowed for a democratization of information, enabling the spread of ideas and creating a new global village. 3. The rise of artificial intelligence, AI and machine learning. The rise of artificial intelligence, AI and machine learning. AI in its early days. Artificial intelligence, AI, has existed as a concept for much longer than most people realize, with its origins dating back to the 1950s, during the dawn of computing. Initially, AI was viewed as the pursuit of creating machines that could mimic human intelligence. However, the development of machine learning algorithms represented a significant turning point in AI's progression. These algorithms enabled systems to learn from data and improve autonomously, transforming AI from a speculative idea into a practical technology that now plays a role in nearly every aspect of our daily lives. In the 21st century, advancements in AI and machine learning have made it possible to develop systems that are capable of tasks that once required human intelligence, such as speech recognition, image processing, and decision-making. Silicon Valley companies such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon are at the forefront of this revolution, using AI to power everything from voice assistants like Siri and Alexa to personalized advertising algorithms. Cultural shifts in the United States. Cultural shifts in the United States are a reflection of its dynamic history, diverse population, and ever-evolving social landscape. These shifts are deeply influenced by generational values, political movements, technological advancements, and globalization. From the civil rights movement of the 1960s to the digital activism of the 21st century, the U.S. has experienced waves of cultural transformation that had shaped its identity. This chapter will explore the major cultural shifts in America, focusing on how they emerge, their lasting impacts, and what they mean for the future. Cultural shifts are not linear. They often overlap and intersect with broader societal changes. In the U.S., they are shaped by a unique mix of influences, including immigration, economic inequality, racial dynamics, and the country's global role. By examining these shifts, we gain a deeper understanding of how the American identity is continuously redefined. 2. The evolution of American media and its role in cultural shifts from traditional media to the digital age. The transformation of media has been one of the most significant drivers of cultural change in the U.S. During the 20th century, media was dominated by print newspapers, radio, and television, which acted as gatekeepers of information. These platforms played a critical role in shaping public opinion and national identity, particularly during times of war, political upheaval, and social movements. The late 20th and early 21st centuries brought a digital revolution that fundamentally altered how Americans consume and interact with media. The rise of the internet and social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram gave individuals unprecedented access to information and the ability to create and share content. This democratization of media has amplified diverse voices, enabling marginalized groups to share their stories and advocate for change. Streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube have also disrupted traditional entertainment models, offering on-demand content and allowing creators to bypass traditional gatekeepers. This shift has led to greater representation of diverse cultures, identities, and perspectives in American entertainment, reflecting and reinforcing cultural change. The media's role in social movements. Media has often been a catalyst for social change in the U.S. During the civil rights movement, television brought images, protests, police brutality, and speeches from leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. into American living rooms, galvanizing public support. Similarly, in the digital age, Movements like Black Lives Matter and #MeToo have harnessed the power of social media to spread awareness, organize protests, and demand accountability. While digital media has empowered activists, it has also created challenges, including the spread of misinformation and the rise of echo chambers that reinforce existing biases. These challenges highlight the dual-edged nature of media in driving cultural shifts. 3. Generational values and their influence. Baby boomers to Gen Z. A comparative look. Each generation in the U.S. has brought its own set of values, shaped by the cultural and historical context of its time. Baby boomers, born in the post-World War II era, grew up during a period of economic prosperity and social conservatism. They were the driving force behind major cultural shifts in the 1960s and 1970s, including the civil rights movement, women's liberation, and anti-Vietnam War protests. Generation X, often described as the MTV generation, came of age during a time of economic uncertainty and cultural fragmentation. They are known for their skepticism of authority and emphasis on individuality. Millennials, who grew up in the digital age, prioritize diversity, social justice, and environmental sustainability. They have been instrumental in advancing conversations about issues like climate change, LGBTQ+ rights, and racial equality. Generation Z, the youngest cohort, is the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in U.S. history. They are digital natives who use technology to amplify their voices and advocate for change. Gen Z is characterized by its focus on mental health, activism, and intersectionality, challenging traditional norms and pushing for a more inclusive society. Intergenerational tensions. The differing values of these generations often lead to tensions, particularly in areas like politics, work culture, and social norms. However, these tensions also drive cultural evolution, as each generation challenges and builds upon the foundations laid by the previous one. 4. The rise of social movements and activism. Civil rights and equality movements. The U.S. has a long history of social movements aimed at achieving greater equality and justice. The civil rights movement of the 1960s was a turning point, challenging systemic racism and segregation. The women's liberation movement fought for gender equality, resulting in landmark achievements like the Equal Pay Act and Roe v. Wade. More recently, movements like Black Lives Matter and #MeToo have brought issues of racial and gender inequality back into the spotlight. These movements have been fueled by social media, allowing activists to organize protests, share stories, and hold powerful individuals accountable. Environmental activism. Environmental activism has also gained traction, with movements like Fridays for Future and the Green New Deal advocating for policies to combat climate change. Younger generations have been at the forefront of this movement, demanding action from governments and corporations to address the climate crisis. Environmental activism. Environmental activism has also gained traction, with movements like Fridays for Future and the Green New Deal advocating for policies to combat climate change. Younger generations have been at the forefront of this movement, demanding action from governments and corporations to address the climate crisis. Intersectionality in activism. A significant cultural shift in recent years has been the emphasis on intersectionality, the recognition that social identities such as race, gender, sexuality, and class intersect to create unique experiences of oppression and privilege. This framework has informed modern activism, making it more inclusive and nuanced. 5. Changing cultural norms and values. Diversity and representation. One of the most profound cultural shifts in the U.S. has been the growing emphasis on diversity and representation. Historically underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, and LGBTQ+ individuals, have gained greater visibility and influence in politics, media, and business. This shift has been driven by grassroots activism, changes in public opinion, and corporate initiatives to promote inclusivity. The entertainment industry, in particular, has seen a push for representation, with films and TV shows featuring diverse casts and stories. This cultural shift not only reflects changing values, but also reinforces them, inspiring audiences to embrace inclusivity. Workplace culture. Cultural shifts are also evident in the workplace, where traditional hierarchies and norms are being challenged. Younger generations prioritize work-life balance, mental health, and diversity, leading to changes in workplace policies and practices. Remote work, flexible hours, and inclusive hiring practices are becoming the norm. Challenges and the future of cultural shifts. Polarization and resistance to change. Cultural shifts often face resistance, particularly from groups that feel threatened by changing norms and values. The U.S. has seen growing political and cultural polarization, with debates over issues like immigration, LGBTQ rights, and education highlighting deep divisions. The role of technology. While technology has been a catalyst for cultural change, it also presents challenges. Social media platforms, for example, can amplify hate speech and misinformation, undermining efforts to promote inclusivity and understanding. The U.S. will need to address these challenges to ensure that technology continues to be a force for positive change. The future of cultural shifts. As the U.S. becomes more diverse and interconnected, cultural shifts are likely to accelerate. Issues like climate change, technological advancements, and globalization will continue to shape American culture, creating new opportunities and challenges. The cultural shifts in the United States reflect its complex and dynamic nature. These shifts are driven by a combination of historical events, generational values, technological advancements, and grassroots activism. While they often spark controversy and resistance, they also represent progress toward a more inclusive and equitable society. By embracing change and fostering dialogue, the U.S. can navigate its cultural evolution and continue to be a beacon of innovation and diversity. Geopolitics and global influence of the United States. The geopolitical influence of the United States has been a defining feature of the modern world. As a global superpower, the U.S. has shaped international relations, economic systems, and political ideologies for over a century. From its isolationist beginnings to its current role as a dominant player in global affairs, the U.S. has consistently used its military, economic, and cultural power to assert influence. Understanding the geopolitics of the U.S. requires examining its foreign policy objectives, alliances, conflicts, and responses to global challenges. This section explores the U.S.'s historical trajectory, its strategies for maintaining influence, and the emerging challenges to its hegemony in the 21st century. Historical context. The evolution of U.S. geopolitics. Isolationism to internationalism. 1776 to 1945. In its early years, the United States adopted a largely isolationist stance, focusing on internal development and avoiding entanglements in European conflicts. This approach was encapsulated in President George Washington's farewell address, where he warned against permanent alliances. However, the 20th century marked a shift toward internationalism. The Spanish-American War 1898 was a turning point, signaling the US's entry onto the world stage. The two world wars further accelerated this transition, with the U.S. emerging as a global leader after World War II. Its involvement in the formation of the United Nations, NATO, and the Bretton Woods economic system reflected a commitment to shaping a new world order. The Cold War era. 1947 to 1991. The Cold War was a period of intense geopolitical rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. The U.S. positioned itself as the leader of the free world, countering the spread of communism through alliances. Economic aid, for example, the Marshall Plan, and military interventions, for example, the Korean and Vietnam Wars. This era also saw the U.S. engage in proxy wars, intelligence operations, and arms races. The doctrine of containment, articulated by George Kennan, guided U.S. foreign policy, emphasizing the need to limit Soviet influence globally. Post-Cold War unipolarity. 1991 to 2001. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the U.S. became the world's sole superpower, ushering in a unipolar moment. During this time, the U.S. championed globalization, free market capitalism, and liberal democracy. It intervened in conflicts such as the Gulf War and played a key role in peacekeeping missions. However, the unipolar era also saw challenges, including the rise of regional powers and criticism of U.S. interventions, such as the bombing of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The U.S. as a global hegemon. Economic influence. The U.S. wields immense economic power, underpinned by the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. Institutions like the World Bank, International Monetary Fund (IMF), and the World Trade Organization (WTO) often reflect U.S. interests, shaping global economic policies. American companies, particularly in the tech, finance, and entertainment sectors, dominate global markets, further extending U.S. influence. Military dominance. The U.S. maintains the world's most powerful military, with a global network of bases and alliances. Its defense spending surpasses that of the next several countries combined, enabling it to project power anywhere in the world. Through alliances like NATO and bilateral agreements, the U.S. ensures strategic access and influence in key regions. Cultural and ideological power. American culture through Hollywood, music, technology, and social media has a profound impact on global society. The spread of American ideals like democracy, individualism, and capitalism has shaped political systems and cultural norms worldwide. Key geopolitical strategies, containment and balance of power. Throughout the Cold War and beyond, the U.S. has used a containment strategy to counter rival powers. Today, this approach is evident in its policies toward China and Russia, aiming to limit their regional and global ambitions. Alliances and multilateralism. The U.S. relies on a network of alliances to maintain its influence. NATO is the cornerstone of its transatlantic strategy, while alliances with Japan, South Korea, and Australia anchor its presence in the Indo-Pacific. Multilateral institutions like the UN and WTO also provide platforms for the U.S. to shape global norms. Economic sanctions and soft power. Economic sanctions are a key tool in U.S. foreign policy, used to pressure adversaries like Iran, North Korea, and Russia. Soft power. Exerting influence through cultural and diplomatic means complements these efforts, enabling the U.S. to build goodwill and promote its values. Contemporary challenges to U.S. influence. China's rapid economic growth and military modernization pose the most significant challenge to U.S. hegemony. Initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative aim to expand China's influence globally, particularly in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The U.S. has responded with policies like the Indo-Pacific Strategy and the CHIPS Act to counter China's technological and economic rise. Resurgent Russia. While Russia's economy is smaller, its assertive actions, such as the annexation of Crimea and intervention in Syria, have challenged U.S. interests. The ongoing Ukraine conflict has further strained U.S.-Russia relations and highlighted the limits of American influence in deterring aggression. Global multipolarity. The world is moving toward multipolarity, with regional powers like India, Brazil, and Turkey asserting greater independence in foreign policy. This shift complicates U.S. efforts to build coalitions and maintain its leadership role. Domestic challenges, internal divisions, economic inequality, and political polarization undermine the U.S.'s ability to project strength abroad. The January 6th Capitol riot and debates over foreign policy priorities reflect deep-seated challenges to national cohesion. The future of U.S. geopolitics. Technological leadership. The U.S. is investing heavily in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and cybersecurity to maintain its competitive edge. These technologies are not only economic drivers, but also critical to national security. Climate diplomacy. Climate change is a growing priority in U.S. foreign policy. The Biden administration's re-entry into the Paris Agreement signals renewed commitment to global climate action. The U.S. aims to lead in green technology innovation and build coalitions to address this existential threat. Evolving alliances. The U.S. is adapting its alliances to address new challenges. Initiatives like the Quad with India, Japan, and Australia and a UK-US with Australia and the UK reflect a focus on countering China in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, the U.S. seeks to strengthen ties with African and Latin American nations to counter Chinese and Russian influence. The U.S. at a crossroads. The United States remains a formidable global power, but its geopolitical landscape is more complex than ever. Balancing the rise of China, managing relations with allies, addressing global challenges like climate change, and navigating domestic pressures will define the future of U.S. geopolitics. Whether the U.S. can adapt to a multipolar world while maintaining its leadership role will depend on its ability to innovate, build coalitions, and uphold the values that have long defined its influence. The United States in the world's future, a global superpower at a crossroads. As the 21st century progresses, the United States faces a rapidly changing global landscape. From emerging powers to transnational challenges like climate change and cyber threats, the U.S. is navigating an increasingly complex world. Its ability to adapt, innovate, and lead will determine not only its future, but also the trajectory of the global order. The US stands at a crossroads, with opportunities to reinforce its leadership role and challenges that threaten to diminish its influence. How the nation addresses these dynamics will shape its place in the world's future. This section explores the key areas where the US is likely to play a pivotal role, the obstacles it must overcome, and the potential paths forward. 2. Economic leadership in a globalized world. Innovation and technology. The US remains a global leader in innovation, home to Silicon Valley and some of the most influential tech companies in the world. Future advancements in artificial intelligence (AI), biotechnology, and clean energy will be critical to maintaining its economic edge. Investments in research and development, R&D, and education will be essential for ensuring that the US remains at the forefront of technological progress. Technological leadership also has geopolitical implications. Controlling critical technologies will allow the US to shape global standards, compete with rivals like China, and address global challenges such as pandemics and climate change. The green economy. As the world transitions to renewable energy, the US has an opportunity to lead in developing and deploying green technologies. This includes innovations in solar, wind, and nuclear energy, as well as advancements in battery storage and carbon capture. By positioning itself as a leader in the green economy, the US can create jobs, reduce reliance on fossil fuels, and strengthen its influence in global climate negotiations. Economic policy and global trade. The US dollar remains the world's dominant reserve currency, giving the nation significant economic leverage. However, this dominance is being challenged by alternative currencies and digital payment systems. To maintain its leadership, the US must modernize its financial systems and engage in fair trade policies that foster global economic stability. Global trade agreements, partnerships, and economic diplomacy will be crucial. The US must strike a balance between protecting domestic industries and promoting free trade, ensuring its economy remains competitive while fostering global economic growth. 3. Leadership in addressing global challenges. Climate change. The climate crisis is one of the most pressing challenges of the 21st century. The US, as one of the largest historical emitters of greenhouse gases, has a responsibility to lead global efforts to mitigate climate change. This includes rejoining international agreements like the Paris Accord, reducing emissions, and investing in sustainable technologies. By working with other nations, the US can help develop global solutions, such as carbon trading systems and climate-resilient infrastructure. Its leadership in this area will be critical to preventing catastrophic environmental consequences. Global health. The COVID-19 pandemic underscored the importance of international cooperation in addressing health crises. The US has the resources and expertise to lead efforts in pandemic preparedness, vaccine development, and global health initiatives. Strengthening institutions like the World Health Organization and expanding access to healthcare in developing countries will enhance global health security. Cybersecurity and digital governance. As the world becomes more interconnected, cybersecurity threats pose significant risks to global stability. The US must lead efforts to create international norms for cyber warfare, protect critical infrastructure, and counter disinformation campaigns. Collaboration with allies and the private sector will be essential for building a secure digital future. Geopolitical strategies for a multipolar world. Managing great power competition. The rise of China as a global power and the resurgence of Russia as a regional force have reshaped the geopolitical landscape. The US must navigate these relationships carefully, balancing competition with cooperation, while countering aggressive actions such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The US should also seek areas of mutual interest, such as arms control and climate agreements. Strengthening alliances like NATO, the Quad, and AUKUS are central to US strategy. In the future, the US will need to adapt these alliances to address new challenges such as cybersecurity and space exploration. Building stronger ties with emerging powers like India and fostering partnerships in Africa and Latin America will also be crucial for maintaining global influence. Engaging in multilateralism. Multilateral institutions such as the United Nations, World Trade Organization, and International Monetary Fund provide platforms for global cooperation. The US should play an active role in reforming and strengthening these institutions to address 21st century challenges, ensuring they remain effective and inclusive. cultural and ideological influence. Promoting democracy and human rights. The U.S. has long championed democracy and human rights as central pillars of its foreign policy. However, the rise of authoritarianism and democratic backsliding worldwide present challenges to this mission. The U.S. must lead by example, addressing its domestic challenges while supporting pro-democracy movements abroad through diplomacy, economic aid, and cultural exchanges. The 21st century has been a period of immense change for the United States. From the horrors of 9/11s to the resilience shown during the financial crisis and the global pandemic, America continues to evolve in the face of new challenges. The journey of this nation is far from over. As we look to the future, the story of the United States continues to unfold, shaped by its past, its people, and its unshakable belief in the promise of freedom and opportunity. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of the United States. Stay tuned for future episodes as we continue to explore the ever-evolving story of America. This is Unfolded Timelines, bringing history to life. If you like our hard work, then please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more episodes, and press bell icon for notifications.